So this is an interesting deck that we're looking at today. This is Pyrowyrms. So I really like worms. I've always really liked worms ever since they first came out in Rush Duel back in the Bill Dragon days. But we've just gotten a new wave of support and there are some gems in there. Cards like Constructor Sentry Dragline, really powerful. Really like this card. The only problem this card has is that we have to play it in a pure worm variant, and I don't think pure worms are going to be that good. Basically right now in Rush, you really want to be doing one of several things. You have to have a way to get to your opponent's life points. That's either going to be piercing, multi-attacking, or destroying monsters. And specifically, we have to destroy face-down monsters, because if your opponent just sets a bunch of monsters, you need a way to pop them to be able to get at their life points. So worms do have that. They have that in Demolition Charge Dragon Dangerous Blastomer, which is a really cool card. We can destroy one face-up card on our field, and 1 or 2 monsters on our opponent's field. Again, doesn't matter if they're face up or face down. Then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of monsters on your opponent's field that were destroyed by this effect, times 500. So a lot of the time we're going to inflict 1000 damage, we're going to lose a card ourselves, and then we're going to be able to punch through for a bit of direct damage, which again is really good. We want that. But again, the rest of the worm deck just sort of facilitates summoning a lot of big guys, and that is cool, but it doesn't do anything crazy. The standard worm deck doesn't really plus a lot. It doesn't have any way to deal with back row. It's a little bit lackluster, I'd say. But that's where this deck comes into play. Specifically, Splame. Splame is a really cool card. So it's a Pyro monster that has the effect of shuffling 2 Pyro type monsters from your graveyard into the deck. This card's name becomes the same as the name of 1 level 8 or lower monster in your graveyard. So what that means is we can use this to become any fusion material as long as that fusion material is already in the graveyard. That means it can become Blast Hammer. That means it could also become Demolition Soldier Helmet. That means it could also become Chemicalized Salamander, or it could become Super Resistant Aichi, or in some situations it become Ethyl or Methyl, because this deck does have a lot of fusion. So because of this effect, and we need to have specifically 2 Pyro monsters, we've decided to go Pyro heavy with this deck. But that is actually a really cool thing because a lot of the Pyro monsters are really interesting. So we'll talk about our other boss monster first, and our other big boss monster is Alchemicalized Salamandra. So we make this using Chemicalized Salamander and Super Resistant Aichi. During the turn this card was special summoned, you can destroy all spell trap cards on the field. Then you make all face-up monsters your opponent control lose attack equal to the number of spell cards destroyed by this effect times 1000. So the reduction can be very relevant, but a lot of the time getting rid of the trap cards is the most important thing so that we can try and push for game. In a lot of situations, what we want to be doing is summoning Salamandra and Blast Hammer at the same time, in the same turn, popping monsters, popping all the back row, and then just punching in for a shit ton of damage and ending on a board that has 2,000-3,000 monsters. For a lot of decks, that is so overwhelming that they won't really be able to do anything about it. Now, there is obviously caveats to that, like 7's Wonder Fusion won't really care about that, but this deck was never going to be a top tier deck. This deck was always going to be kind of a tier 3, top of tier 3, bottom of tier 2 sort of deck. It was never going to be winning big tournaments, but it can definitely take games off of those stronger decks. So if we talk about the third fusion this deck can make, Melel, the beautiful flame spirit of the lamp, made using Methyl and Ethyl, we can draw 1 card and show it, and if the card is a Pyro type monster, we can special summon a level 8 or lower Pyro type monster from our graveyard face up to our field. That means a lot of the time the best target for this is just going to be the Chemicalized Salamander. Being able to bring back a 2500 monster that can weaken your opponents is pretty good. But worst case scenario, we can bring back something like Combustion Oni Bunsel, which again has a really good effect. We can bring back Splame and get another fusion play going. We could just bring back some of the actual fusion material themselves, like Super Assistant Aichi, and if we already have the Chemicalized Salamander, go for a fusion play there. But there is quite a lot of combos this deck can do, and it's very fun and does plus quite a lot. So if we go through the card by card, Aichi is just a fusion support, but also 1500 defense is pretty good, especially into things like Aquila. We have the Blast Hammer, whose effect is actually completely useless. This is just in here as fusion material and a 2500 beta, but that is all it needs to be. It doesn't have to use its effect, although its effect is pretty good, and based on our side deck plan, it still can be used, but we don't need this to be the focal point of the deck. I think that's completely fine. Chemicalized Salamander is a really cool boss monster. It has some of the best art in the game, and its effect is really good. Shuffle 3 Pyro type monsters, weaken your opponent's board. Decent, and 2500 attack is definitely fantastic. We're on Riser, because Riser is a very versatile card. The only real weakness of this card is that it's level 6, which means it does lose to Aquila, but being able to spin a spell, trap, or monster back to the top of your opponent's deck is amazing. Being able to deal with a frustrating back row your opponent might have, or get rid of their big boss monster, is huge and can cause your opponent to brick as well. It can be a very frustrating card to play against. On the 3 Aquila, because it's just a fantastic card, it combos really well with Bunzel, and of course we're on Bunzel because we're on a Pyro deck, but Aquila on its own is just really, really strong. You can, again, get in for a lot of direct damage. You can wipe your opponent's board. If your opponent's playing any level 6s, it's just really, really strong to that. We have Barrier Statue. Again, we can summon under this because we can summon fire monsters. Every monster we're summoning is a fire monster, so we can just fusion summon with Barrier Statue up. So really, really good in here. Display again, we've already spoken about this, but it's fantastic. Methyl, again, its effect is useless, but it's in here just to be summoned off of Ethel, so it's what it is. It's just part of the fusion. Already talked about Bunzel, and then Ethel, the Flame Djinn of the Lamp. Again, really, really good. We can summon it, cheat out Methyl, tribute them both to summon out a monster, or we can fuse them into the Melel and then get that effect to draw. And then Demolition Soldier Helmet. So we can send one card from our hand to the graveyard, except Fusion, pay 500 life points, add Fusion from our graveyard to the hand, then you can add a field spell from your graveyard to your hand. So this card only pluses us if we're getting back the field spell. But being able to get back Fusion is often still really, really good. You don't lose any advantage for doing so. And so let's say we just have Helmet and Splame. That there is a Fusion combo, assuming we have Fusion and Blast Hammer in the graveyard already. And that means we just immediately get to summon out Blast Hammer, which is really, really good. So for our Legend spell, we've gone with Graceful Charity. That is just because this deck needs to set up the graveyard to be able to do pretty much anything. So we're basically using this to try and turbo stuff into the grave. We need lots of pyros in there. We need our fusion materials in there. So that's why we've gone with this. 3 copies of fusion, because again, we need to fuse. It's a fusion deck. That's kind of how the deck works. And then we're on 3 copies of Pot of Arrogance. So the reason we've gone with Arrogance is because our boss monsters have different levels at 7 and 8. That makes it a little bit awkward to play either Ship of the Seven Treasures or Trade-In. So we've gone with Pot of Arrogance because it's kind of a nice middle ground, and that lets us focus on a few more trap cards. And so for them, we've got 3 Nobody Scat Thief. The only problem of running this at 3 is Sea Dragon Knight can punish you for this, but Nobody Scat Thief is a fantastic trap card. It can unbrick you, it can find cards that you need for your combo, and it can save you from losing the game to level 8 and lower monsters' attacks. Next up, Magic Cylinder. It's the best legend in the game. And then finally, Ascetic Trap Hole. This card's kind of a flex slot, but Ascetic is pretty good. Against most decks, this card is kind of a pain in the ass for them. So just being able to pop a weak effect monster is just decent. It's decent. So for the side deck, we have Flame Ruler. So we were using this originally before Riser, but Flame Ruler is really cool for unbricking, but if you're bricking, you're probably having a rough time anyway. I think Riser is better in more situations. Next up, we have this combo of Heavy Roller and Prison Island Cell Block 5 and 6. So basically, we're not playing field spells in this deck because we feel like we don't really need to get Blast Hammer's effect off. Other than that, the field spells that we could use would be the Hot-Blooded Spirit Stadium, which gives 400 attack to 5 monsters during our turn, which is fine, but I don't feel like this deck needs it. We have a lot of ways to pop monsters, we have a lot of ways to weaken our opponent's monsters. Getting a 400 more attack doesn't seem worth the slots. But being able to use Cell Block 5 and 6 definitely does against decks that are really, really hurt by this. Specifically, Harpies seems to be the main one. And if we are playing that, we might as well also play Heavy Roller, which lets us send a fire action monster from our hand to the graveyard, draw a card, and if we have a field spell, we can draw 1 additional card. This basically lets us go a little bit less trap heavy, because traps, again, typically aren't very good into something like Harpies. And then we can play the Heavy Roller Prison Island combo, get rid of the Arrogance and get rid of some of our traps, and then kind of have that going as a little different engine. So for our other side deck cards, we have Gaga Guts, which is an interesting one. When a monster on your field is destroyed by the opponent's card effect, we can special summon a fire monster from our graveyard to our field and face up defense position. So that in itself is pretty good. If your opponent dark holes, we can just summon a chump blocker, which a lot of the time will be enough to help out. Especially against some decks, just being able to not lose to dark hole or a board wipe is really, really strong. We have Buffeted Slime. This is basically in here for Cyber Dragon or the Guildford OTK decks, because this card can stop us from taking damage, but can cost us a few life points. Word Working is in here specifically for 7's Wonder Fusion and 7's Wonder Fusion adjacent, like the new Wind Warrior decks. We have the Torrential Tribute, which again is good into Sea Serpents, it's good into Wind Warriors, anything that can pop your back row or just doesn't care about Magic Cylinder. And then we have Christ at Sacred Tower, which again, being able to stop monsters on summon can be really strong. So this is the deck. It's relatively strong. It's very fun to play as well. If you're getting a bit bored of your Sea Serpents and your Cyber Dragons and your Light Machine mid-range and your 7's Wonder Fusion, I think this is a very fun alternative. Like I said, it is strong enough that it can take games off of those decks. But it's, again, this isn't going to be super hyper consistent. It's not going to be a tournament winning deck in my opinion, but still very fun. So let's run some replays. I can show you what I'm talking about.